Athar Tahir. Safina Danish Elahi and Christy Marie Lauder and the author along with Shahzad Abdullah in conversation. Thank you.
Hello. Great. Hello. Yeah. Hello.
Hello.
Charlie, good afternoon, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the 10th edition of the Adab Festival, Pakistan. My name is Shahzad Abdullah, and it is an honor to moderate today's session. The launch of Where Cicadas Sing, an evocative and deeply textured new novel by the distinguished writer, poet, and artist Athar Tahir. We're joined by two other remarkable voices from Pakistan's contemporary literary landscape, Miss Safina Danish Elahi, novelist, poet, publisher, and Christy Lauder, writer, teacher, and champion of critical and creative expression. Today, we'll explore the memory, movement, symbolism, and emotional resonance of Athar Saab's novel, a story that travels across geographies, cultures, and inner worlds. Let's begin. Um, Sir, I'll start off with you. It is an oft quoted phrase that perhaps it is one of the most easiest things um, to be able to write a book. All you have to do is face a piece of paper and bleed. So, my first question to you, sir, in that regard, where did Cicadas begin for you?
Cicadas actually began not with me, but centuries before me. The background to this insect, as you know, the male insect rubs its abdomen with its legs and creates this sound which you might have heard on summer evenings. And the oldest mention of the cicada is actually part of Roman mythology. And you have references to it in the Iliad, you have references to it in the Odyssey, you have references to it in a number of other Western epics. But surprisingly, this insect also figures in Eastern mythologies. And you find this in Japanese and Chinese literature as well. Japanese especially have written poets, Japanese poets, have especially written a great number of haikus, which is a 3-line poem, on the cicada. And I completed my book of haikus some 7-8 years ago, which was published as The Last Tea. And I was fascinated by the references to this insect which nobody bothers to even think about, and yet here it is making its sound and announcing the fact that it is alive and kicking. So that's how I encountered the insect cicadas through my reading of various literatures. And then, of course, when I began to think about this novel, which is one of 4 novels, the 4th has been published and it won a national award. This is the first one, and there are 2 more to go. I realized that this was a theme which links me with the literatures of East and West. And it is a sound which permeates the novel. and you will, if you read it, you will see it makes its appearance at very crucial points in the story I have to tell.
Lovely, sir. Thank you so much. The novel occasionally, not occasionally rather, but it constantly shifts between two worlds. How does your own personal experiences sort of curate this narrative in the novel itself?
Well, you see, a thing speaks the truth when it is something you've deeply felt. It's easy to make artifice of things, to construct things which you may or may not have perceived, but you construct them in such a manner that it becomes fiction. And there's so many types of fiction, I don't have to go into that. I'm sure you know the subgenres of fiction. But in this particular case, I felt that I have to articulate the feelings and observations, far more than feelings, of a 9-year-old, and as he goes through life to 12 years. So there were a number of things which I had to consider. I read a number of very famous books on children growing up. A favorite one, of course, which is being taught in various schools, is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. But then there are a number of others like Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn, and Tom Sawyer, and short stories by Catherine Mansfield. They all are either in the third person or in the first person, but always in the past tense, which means that the person who is writing it, who is opening out to you, is talking about his past or his family's past. So it is something that is recalled, but it doesn't have the freshness of direct observation. This is the only novel I know in which it's first person singular and it's present tense, so that you experience the feelings, thoughts, and ideas of this child growing up as he's experiencing it himself. So it has an immediacy which, if you recall something, it wouldn't have. My son asked me, about this novel, and I said, and I just like to quote what I said to him. I said, "This is a novel written for matured persons, which children can also read." So it works on those two levels, that a child with a limited vocabulary of 9 to 12 is communicating to you as he's experiencing things himself. That's how I looked at it.
Great, sir. Thank you. You mentioned that the protagonist is an amalgam of lived experience and a fictionalization of print. I wanted to ask you how much of the boy in the novel is you, and how much of it is made up for the reader's benefit?
That's a question I'm always asked. The last novel which I wrote was about a bureaucrat, retired bureaucrat, who is falling in love with a not very pretty professor, Thai professor, and people ask me whether that was my own experience or not. And similarly, people ask me about this novel as well. You see, there is always some part of the work that you create which is you, but there is also another part which is not you, which you are trying to capture, which you are trying to replicate, which you are trying to communicate with the reader. So it's up to the critics now to delve into whether this is me or this is not me. What I had to say, I've said.
All right. Sir, straight from the horse's mouth, if I were to ask you, what do you think is the emotional heartbeat of this book? For example, what sentiment do you wish for the reader to, what virtue or sentiment do you wish for the reader to impart upon themselves once they're done reading this book?
I think it's difficult to say that, because every reader will take away something which he or she likes to look at or prefers. So every reader is going to look at the book differently. So whatever I had to say and communicate, I've done that. And it's up to the readers now to see which aspect of what I've written is something that appeals to them. And there are so many things that you can take away from it. Childhood experience is so pure and so innocent, and yet the observations of a child, just like the emperor's new clothes, as you know, the story goes that he was very fond of having expensive clothes, and he went around naked. And only a child saw that he was naked. His courtiers and the public, they thought that he was very well dressed. So it's the disarming of maturity that tends to veil the truth that I think is the underlying message in this book. That you have to see things with the innocence of a child to really appreciate the world around you.
Thank you, sir. Moving on, I just want to go down the panel a little bit. Miss Elahi, as a novelist yourself, what struck you most about the narrative of Cicadas?
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for being here. When I began reading the book, I quite liked the first line, which says, "This time I do not cry. I am 8 now, and I was 4 then." So it immediately makes the reader understand that what is to follow is a child, and they're going to be sharing their journey. The prose itself, initially, it's intriguing to me how short and abrupt it was. So I was like, okay, this is going to build up, and it initially read like a storybook, like Athar Saab just said,
Yes.
a children's storybook. But I was like, no, this is for adult reading as well. And slowly, as I progressed through the book, I understood that it's short thought processes shared by this 8 to 9-year-old child. And there's some confusions that the child has, and they ask really innocent questions. So I was quite intrigued by that. And I compared it to Ice Candy Man by Bapsi Sidhwa. That's
Okay,
also
wow.
an 8-year-old. Then I've also, read Lord of the Flies.
Lord of the
That's
Flies.
also sort of an anarchy situation between children. So you see how children deal with each other. Again, similar age group. Then Turtles all the way down, and even, in fact, my own Tipler Pigeon, the idle stance of the Tipler Pigeon. So one of the point of views is actually from a 7 to 8-year-old.
Yeah.
And that is also in current, it's not past tense, it's directly from the 7-year-old's voice.
So, within a similar vein from what I asked, sir, what theme resonated with you the most?
I think just the innocence of children, right? Like, they understand and view the world according to their experiences. So whatever they've seen so far. And I found the book to be very honest, because it felt like the child is developing thoughts, and those thoughts are being penned down as the child is
As they
thinking
happen.
them,
Yeah.
So there's no translation really. It's what you view the world with, it's on the page. And at times, they're also sporadic. One thought switches to another, to a past thought to a current thought about a friend, about a parent. So, I mean, the mix was very interesting to observe as a reader, rather than a writer, because this is what I also, similar to this, but my child was more in continuous thought. So the sentence structure was more overlapping, rather than, finishing with a period.
Well, it's very coincidental that you sort of drew parallels with it with, again, literary artifacts that exist in this catalog in this day and age. When we talk about Cicadas, for example, here's a little bit of a holistic question for you. Where do you think it stands, this novel, in the grand scheme of English Pakistani literature in the modern landscape?
So I've had the pleasure of reading some Pakistani fiction, more so after I started my own publishing house and met other writers and publishers, and I think there's great work being put forward. A lot of the work that was being published, I think a decade ago, was a lot for the Western world and Western lens. But specifically, something like this work is important because it talks about themes of childhood and identity and memory, and we have been talking about identity for a really long time. Durre Amna's book American Fever talks about it. The Family Tree by Sarish Hussain, I think that's published in the UK. So a lot of it is by adult voices that are kind of moved when they were children, so they're kind of second generation. And you see that there's displacement and there's sort of search for your roots and where you come from. But I think this is distinctively I'd say, original in terms of the child being moved somewhere. So they're really original thoughts and honest thoughts by the child who's being moved by a family.
Yeah.
So a lot of times those adult thoughts are kind of still shaped by their friends, and they have matured thoughts, but these are just kind of like jotted down, and I think it's excellent the way it's done.
Thank you. Moving on farther down the panel, Miss Christie. You've written and taught about sensory detail and mood-driven fiction. How do you think Mr. Athar builds the world of this novel?
I really love this question. I think if you are not a writer, understanding the difference between a sensory detail and like a thought is a really kind of opaque curtain to kind of peer through. And so a lot what we're getting is not like adult introspection of like, I remember this time and this thing, and then I felt this way and I did this other thing. But because it is in present tense, it is what the child is experiencing at the moment, which includes like incredible details about food or about games they're playing or like being stung by a wasp, that they're really immediate and they are really like in the moment. So sensory details, like from our perspective as writers, are what brings you, the readers, into the moment of the book and makes you grounded and be there. And that's something that this does really well. And I think that choice of the present tense just puts you into it. So he's not reflecting on like this time he was stung by a wasp like 50 years ago, but he's in the moment where his friends have tricked him into like knocking this wasp nest and he gets stung. And so you have these like concrete details that are not like through like a Freudian analytical like, and then this also meant this other thing. Like this is symbolic of that, as opposed to like literally being in the moment with the narrator.
Okay, so while we understand that majority of the protagonist's journey is sort of prepubescent, but you can go as far as to say that this is in fact a coming of age story. So when we say coming of age, what sort of thematically, how does that resonate with you the most when you read it?
I think we definitely see, so the action of the novel takes place about 3.5 years is how I cataloged, because he has 3 birthdays and then leaves at the end. So we see sort of a growing awareness of like both his movement around Malaysia, his understanding of kind of what's happening around him in terms of like family interactions and like aunties and uncles and like there's just an obvious like growth of like understanding of the world, but still having some questions. Like a first love is present there, some young girl that he thinks about a lot, even after he leaves the country. In fact, that's his last thought when he leaves the country, is whether or not she thinks of him. Like growing, and there's just this lovely journey, and again, I think it's the present tense that pulls us through in this. For adults to read from a children's perspective, it's very difficult. It's very difficult for us to have empathy for that period in our life that we have moved very far past. And so not everybody loves being reminded of like those uncomfortableness and that awkwardness of like being 9 and then being 10 and then being 11 and not really knowing what's going on around you. And there's something really lovely about being pulled in that journey with him as he figures things out in a strange country, right? He's not in Pakistan. There's lots of references to like, this is not how we would do it at home. This is how, I would do it at home, but this is not how it's done here. And these things that adults have a hard time wrestling with, but a child is sort of like processing, and we are processing with him as he grows older.
Yeah, agreed. No, so a large part of the book is also about like navigating cross cultural relationships. As an extension of endearment, how I want you to talk about how delicately that has been handled in this novel.
I think we can tell that I probably think about cross-cultural relationships quite a bit. And I do, again, think that it is the voice of the narrator that really allows you to be sensitive here. So things that an adult narrator would not get away with saying. That adults will not be given grace to not understand what's going on around them. Adults will not be given grace to describe a food in a certain way, or another person in a description of another person in a different way. Children are given that because we're not expecting them to have like social niceties, right? So this child can then like experience the fact is like even I as an adult like have questions about when I moved to Pakistan and like introduced to new cultural customs or new cultural foods, but that I could not voice them in a way that may not have been offensive. But if I was 9, right, like no one's gonna think anything strange about me saying like, I don't understand why this like curry is here. I don't understand what this food is. And so you do get that level of innocence allows you to kind of do this exploring that frankly many of us do experience when we're in a new and strange situation, but we have all these filters of adulthood that tell us like, don't ask that question or you're going to be rude or you're misunderstanding. And there's plenty of observations that he makes as a child that are like very based in being a child, things you would just never describe from an adult point of view. You know, like fat auntie is fat auntie, and that is not something that maybe if I was like a 40-year-old protagonist, I would get away with calling a character in a book. But that's how a child would see that, right? And they don't mean anything by it. That's the other bit, is that there's a lack of bias or a lack of like disgust, right? There's nothing that's in there that it seems like. You know, like I'm rejecting this because this is foreign. Instead it's I'm curious about this because I just don't know it, and it's not what I'm used to, and that really opens you up to have an experience that is allows you to grow. That's also the great thing about being a child and being exposed to something new that really opens your world up. And when you're a child, you tend to be a little more open to experiencing new things and understanding new people and making friends that don't look like you or don't come from the same religion or the same region. And that's what he does throughout this entire thing. He's moved around the country and he's also moved through various cultural situations.
While we're talking about reflecting on childlike innocence, do you have anything to say about the use of simple language as a conduit for an extension of that?
Yes, I mean, it feels very much like a child thinks. And there's moments I think that simple language really hammers home. When you were speaking, what I was thinking about was the part where he was drowning. And so there's a swimming moment where he's having a hard time swimming, and the implication is he's kind of drowning. And then the thought process in the sentence was like this big run-on sentence of like, I can't quite remember, I have it tagged, I could probably find it, but like, I can't swim, I can't do this, which is exactly how your thought process is in that moment when like you're terrified. And I think that's where that simplistic language really allows a lot of emotional impact to like go through, and you're not filtering in like wild description of like how the water felt or whatever, but you're in that immediate moment where he's having a panic, and the sentence structure on that line level allows that panic to kind of come through.
So, and this is for the panel just as a whole. I was very curious to know that, again, reading the book, writing the book in this regard, of course, and then for everybody else who sort of goes away with it, if there's anything else in the novel apart from the literary context and the journey taken, what is one element of the book that you would want all readers to sort of take away from this? We could just go.
I think I defer to what you'd like to say.
Okay, well, I guess I'll start since I'm the end and we can go back
Go
this
ahead.
way. I think take away a sense of wonder. Like the world is wondrous, right? And unfortunately, sometimes we're jaded as adults into thinking that the world is not amazing and that everybody kind of is awful and things are terrible. But really, the world is full of amazing moments and amazing people, and sometimes we need to like maybe back out of that adult filtering headspace into viewing things like with the innocence of a child to realize like how fantastic the world can be around us.
I wouldn't call it a takeaway, but it had instances of, sudden memory. There's a paragraph that talks about those billboards that say "to let."
Yeah.
And I remember when I was younger, I would also think that why is this toilet on rent? So I'd be like, but like everyone has a toilet.
Yes,
like why
yes.
is there like such advertising, such big advertisement boards about it? So I think that all children inherently think like that. Like you mispronounce things in your head, and things that you don't know about, you question, and you question quite bluntly. And I think that resonated with me so much when I read that. I was like, oh, that was me. I thought that.
Can I add, because that really, when I landed in Karachi for the first time and I drove to my house, in America we say to rent, right? Not to let. And I was like, I know Pakistan has toilets. Why there's an advertisement for toilets? And it took me like the full drive from the airport to my house to be like, oh, to let.
It took me years.
Okay, so another thing, one last thing that I wanted everyone's sort of input on, one thing that the novel really handles really expertly also is sort of the impact of this cross-cultural sort of journey that sometimes, I know it's not something that a lot of people have the privilege and or experience to kind of go through, but it's something which irreparably changes your worldview, your perspective. How successful was this book in sort of navigating or sort of like putting that on paper for the panelists?
I think it was quite successful, actually. I think that for a while, because as a reader, writer, editor's lens, I automatically start to think back what the writer is thinking, right? So I'm like, has he spent, how much time has he spent in Malaysia? And has he spent his childhood in Malaysia to be able to sort of, be in a classroom and interact in a way that that child is interacting. In fact, like I started going back and forth, with if it says in the bio as well, because generally, like if a student has studied in Colombia, then I see that the character in the story is also a student in Colombia, so it's easier to write when you've actually been through it.
Yes.
So I tried Googling and I was like, okay, what's going on here? So I think that it has been quite successful because that feeling in that moment, it feels very honest that the child has actually experienced it. So I don't know if you have spent your childhood there or was it an imaginative experience, but I think it delivered.
I would say almost exactly the same thing because I am also an editor and writer, and that's the same process I went through. I said, he had to. Like, he had to have spent time in Malaysia. If not Malaysia, then another foreign country as a child. There was such we go back to that question about specificity. That's often where authenticity also rings through. Like, there's just such that feeling of like a lived experience. And I also liked what you said, sir, about like, it's up for the reader to decide whether or not like that's something that I have done or have not done, or where I end and the character begins. But that that's also a credit to, I think, both writing or what you put on the page, that we have that as a question that, like, clearly this must have been an experience you have because it rings so true to the reader.
Sir, it just so happens that you're here. So the questions posed by the panel and myself as well, I think what we were trying to allude to was the fact that because it's still a childlike innocence, how much of it just automatically leads you into feeling like an interloper, even though you are in fact part of that tapestry anyway. That's what we were sort of getting into.
Picasso was asked once that you paint like a child.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, it has taken me 70 years to learn to paint like a child. So what I'd like to say about this particular work is that, as you must have seen in the bio data, 12 awards, international, local, national, on poetry and all sorts of other things. But this series of novels, the 4 in the series, are basically the crux of simplifying the experience, simplifying the language, simplifying the attention span to such a degree that it looks childlike. And it's taken me a good 60 years to write like a child, to learn to write like a child. So in that way, I hope it appeals to adults as well, because there are a number of adult themes in it, which you are supposed to pick up on your own, which I just hinted at. The jailer getting a second wife, a Malay wife, or the police wala, who is a Pakistani settled in Malaya, hiding nude photographs in his closet, and things like that. Things which a child can see and perhaps just forget about them. But as a mature reader, you begin to see that there is a different serious theme that is pervading this innocence. So coming back to Picasso, he was I saw his exhibition years ago. When he was 7 years old, he painted a crow. His father was also a painter. He painted a crow, and the crow was so lifelike that his father told him that after this I can't paint anymore, having seen your talent. That was Picasso. And from that, he turned to semi-abstract work. He turned to cubism, for which he is known. He turned to a number of other styles of art, which embodied that 70 years of experience until he could sketch and draw and paint like a child does. But all that thought process was there, which enriched the experience of his work. So in that way, it's the structure for me is very important. And I've learned that from writing 150 sonnets. I've learned that from free verse. I've learned that from rhymed verse. That it's the structure which helps you to convey the best possible way of what you want to convey. Because if you don't have a proper structure of what your creative work is, it might falter and it might not really deliver. So structure for me, and this I was discussing in the earlier session also when I was reviewing the book of Ms. Nagori, it was a structure that holds the novel together. Because you have observations, I have observations, the critics have observations about life, but it's how you put them together, how they come together that counts. It might be any genre, but the technique, the carpentry of, the mechanics of creativity, those are very important for a person who wants to write.
Well said, sir. Thank you so much. From the Picassos of the world to Mr. Adab Tahir. Sir, thank you so much for your contribution. Can we have a warm round of applause for Adab Tahir and the esteemed panelists, Ms. Christy, Ms. Safina. Thank you so much. The book, Where Cicada Sing, is now available for purchase. Thank you all once again for being part of this book launch. And with that, thank you all very much.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure.
Thank you so much. Now we have Shandana Minhas in conversation with Taha Kehar.